On this episode of the Whiskey Tornado, I give you guys my top 5 bourbon beginner tips. Welcome back to another episode of the Whiskey Tornado. I'm your host, Lance. Today we are talking about bourbon beginner tips. How to get into bourbon. How do you start tasting bourbon and enjoying it? How do you pick out all those nuances and flavors? Today I'm going to help you guys with that. All right, guys, first on this list, let's talk advice. The person you're asking should be finding out where your palate is. Do you like higher proof whiskeys? Do you like lower proof whiskeys? What kind of flavors do you like? Do you like caramel? Do you like apples? Do you love oak? Do you love rye spice, peppery spice? All those things are gonna help determine what whiskey or bourbon is perfect for you. And if you're asking somebody and they're not asking those questions and they're just telling you what they like, they might and probably are leading you down a path you're not gonna like. All right, the second tip for bourbon beginners is pick the right glassware. I'm telling you, I thought this was the silliest thing when I started drinking bourbon, but it matters. These Glencairn glasses are amazing for nosing and tasting bourbon. It sounds crazy, but it 100% smells and tastes different coming out of a glass like this. Now, you may not like this glass. You may like a rocks glass, which is perfectly fine. But bourbons taste different out of different glasses. And they definitely nose different. In these Glencairns, this like tulip design kind of traps the alcohol here and lets the scents like vent through. And you can pick those out better. Also, when you're nosing, inhale through your mouth and your nose at the same time. That'll help kind of break up some of those alcohol notes that you get, and it'll help you pick up flavors over time. Number 3, let's talk acclimation. As most of you know, I'm a personal trainer, and one of the things I do with my clients, my new clients, is I take them through an acclimation week. They need a period where their body can adjust to working out, adjust to the soreness. The same thing needs to be done when you start drinking bourbon. You need to acclimate to it, and it's gonna take a while, and it's gonna be different for everybody. It took me about 2 weeks to finally get over that alcohol burn, the squeezing of my chest, and just tasting fire till I was like, oh, there's caramel, there's vanilla, there's some cinnamon, there's some oak, but it's gonna take some time. So the first thing, if you're going into bourbon fresh and you've never had it before, take your first sip like it's hot coffee. And I still do that now. My first sip of bourbon of the day, I always just take a little sip, let it get over my tongue, let my tongue quickly acclimate, and then I take a bigger sip and I can start picking out a lot more of the sweetness and nuances of the bourbon. But straight away, if you're brand new to bourbon, sip slow, sip small, and realize that it's gonna take you a couple weeks to acclimate. Now, I started drinking bourbon about 3 years ago, and I still have the very first bottle of bourbon that I bought, and it's Breckenridge bourbon out of Colorado. I think I saw a Whiskey Tribe review and it sounded good and I thought the story was cool, so I went and got some. Luckily, I picked a bourbon that was lower in alcohol. This is 43% alcohol or 96 proof. And it was still really challenging for me at first. I've got a glass poured because I haven't had it in a long time. And you can see like I quickly started going and buying different bourbons after I acclimated to the alcohol in this. Yeah, now it's so funny that this used to burn. Now it tastes like water. This bottle's older, so it's not fair for me to give it a review, but there's just a lot of oak and there's some caramel and some apple sweetness in there. I'm sure this bottle was much better a few years ago. I probably need to toss it, but it's just sentimental to me that this is the bourbon that got me into drinking bourbon and loving it. So make sure you guys take time to acclimate, because even when I started drinking at a 96 proof bourbon, all I tasted was fire. All right, guys, my number 4 tip is developing your palate. So one of the greatest things about bourbon is when you finally start to acclimate to the alcohol and you start picking out nuances and you start finding different flavors. I used to think people were crazy and there's no way they found all the flavors they were saying, but I'm telling you guys, it's real. It just takes time. It took me a while, and I want to give you some tips on how to do that. So one of the first things I do when I sit down with a bourbon is I look for sweetness. What are some sweetness notes that I can pick out? Is it vanilla? Is it caramel? Is it brown sugar? After I look for those notes, maybe it's honey even, after I look for those sweetness notes, I move on to fruit notes. Am I finding cherries, apples, berries, strawberries, raspberries? I've even heard some people find blueberries. I've never found blueberry note in a whiskey, but I've heard of people doing that. And they're not wrong. Taste is subjective. You taste what you taste. After that, I move on to spices. Am I finding clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice? So after I look for sweetness, fruits, and spice, I move on to age. And if I'm looking for youthful notes, or if I'm finding youthful notes, it's usually like I'm tasting grain, I'm tasting ethanol, maybe it tastes a little thin. In a lot of craft distilleries, I get like fresh cut wood, or almost like my grandfather used to take me to get feed for the horses, and I can taste like almost like the feed bags smelled. I can taste that on a youthful craft type whiskey. On a more aged whiskey, I'm looking for tannins. I'm looking for, is it drying out my mid palate? Am I finding sweet oak? Those types of things are helping me realize that this is an older or younger whiskey, along with finding those sweetness notes, fruit notes, and spice notes. And then for me to be a good bourbon, it's how are all those flavors melding together? Am I finding just sweetness? Am I finding just spice? Am I finding a lot of youth and nothing else? Or am I finding some sweetness? Am I finding fruits? Am I finding spices? Is it a long finish? Am I getting some sweet oak to tell me there's age there? Am I maybe even getting some dank wood to show me some age? But on dank wood, I don't want too much, just a hint of it, just to know that that bourbon's a little aged, a little older. And if I'm finding all those things, that is a fantastic bourbon. But again, just remember, it's gonna take time. You need to sit down with a glass of bourbon in the right glass, sit there, try to pick out notes, and then revisit it over time, because whiskey's gonna change. The more you drink it, the more it oxidizes, the more it changes. It's always changing, and it's a beautiful thing. Number 5, let's talk about A/B comparing. So one of the biggest mistakes I see some of my friends make who are into bourbon is not A/B comparing and not having enough bottles open at one time. They often have 2 to 3 bottles open, and that's it. As you can see on my bar behind me, you can't see all of my bar, but I have about 60 bottles open at a time. And I will drink on a Wednesday night, on a Friday night, and a Saturday night. And those 3 nights that I enjoy bourbon during the week, I am always A/B comparing, or I'm having multiple distilleries in a night so that I can pick out nuances between them, so I can develop my palate, so that my brain's better connected to my sense of smell and my sense of taste. I know, oh, this is Heaven Hill because I taste more dried peanuts in this, or maybe Jim Beam, but I know those 2 distilleries are heavy with the dried peanuts and caramel. Or maybe I'm tasting cherry cola notes and it's leading me towards Stag Junior. But it really helps you identify, it gives you something to compare, and without comparison, your brain isn't gonna connect to your palate as well. So make sure you guys have a lot of bottles open and that you A/B compare to really develop your palate. All right, guys, we've got one more tip. This is a bonus tip for you bourbon beginners, and that's don't let the bourbon game frustrate you. Don't let bourbon hunting frustrate you. I'm here to tell you, as somebody that's been hunting bourbon for 3 years, there is so much good juice on the shelf that people aren't chasing. Remus it's MGP juice out of Indiana is one of those. If you see a bottle of this and you want a special occasion bourbon, buy George Remus. It's $80 and most people aren't hunting it, and it's so much better than a lot of allocated bourbons that are out there. And as far as allocated bourbons go, as you guys get into this game, you're gonna realize that stores hide allocated bourbons in the back for their VIP customers. And this can be frustrating when you get into the bourbon game. They hold these bourbons back for customers that spend $500 a month or more on bourbon. That's not most of us. And it can be extremely frustrating. I've seen tons of videos where people recommend that you develop relationships with managers to get calls on those bourbons. And what I would say is just be nice to your store owners, be a good human, and don't expect anything in return. If you can do that, and that goes with most things in life, be nice, help people with the expectation of nothing in return, then you won't get mad when a store owner doesn't call you. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've developed relationships with store managers, bar owners, but that's because we went to bourbon tastings together. It's not because I walked into a store with the specific goal of being nice to somebody so I could get certain bourbons. That's just not who I am. I understand why people do it, and that's okay, but just be nice to all the store owners. Don't expect anything in return. And if you happen across an allocated bottle, celebrate, grab it, and really enjoy it. But there are bottles on the shelf right now, a lot of them, that are better than a lot of allocated bourbons people are hunting and paying 2-3 times MSRP for. So feel free to walk into a store, get to know a store owner, ask them to call you when they get a certain allocated bourbon, but just understand that they might not, that they have customers that are spending over $500 a month that they're trying to take care of, which is completely understandable. And just be nice to them and be a good human, expect nothing in return. And after you've been a customer for a while there, they may give you a call on some stuff. But I see so many people getting so frustrated with the bourbon game because they can't get their hands on allocated bourbons that are in the back of the store. And I get it, I was one of those people. But since I've been hunting bourbon and tasting bourbon for 3 years now, I've realized there's so much good stuff on the shelves that people aren't chasing, like George Remus. And I'm fine. If I get a call, great. If I don't, that's okay. There's plenty of good stuff out there. There are so many companies distilling bourbon right now, and it's a wonderful thing to get into and to celebrate special occasions, special milestones in your life. Even to use as a memory bottle. I have a memory bottle for a friend of mine who passed away, and I only get that bottle out once a year to celebrate her life. So there's lots of reasons to get into bourbon. Just enjoy it. Don't let the bourbon game frustrate you guys. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this list of my top 5 bourbon beginner tips. It will really help you get into bourbon and love bourbon. If you liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like to be a member of our Patreon page, you can be a patron for as little as $2 a month. We're doing Zoom tastings. I'm sending out samples and bottles to our Patreons. So if you want to join the bourbon crew there, you can click on the link in the description below. Thank you guys, and have a wonderful week. Cheers.